William Lawrence. He's a professor of political science and international affairs at George Washington University, with specializing in North Africa and Middle East affairs. William, it is great to have you back. Thanks for being with us. First of all, can you just start by sort of explaining why Khalifa Haftar is launching this push now and what the power dynamics are on the ground?
Well, Khalifa Haftar's forces attacked Tripoli on April 4th, about 9 months ago, while the UN General Secretary was in Tripoli a week before a UN conference, a National Reconciliation Conference, to torpedo the conference. Since then, there's been some movement on the front lines, but basically not much has changed on the front lines of the conflict. What's most concerned the United States right now is there's been a recent deployment of several hundred more Russian mercenaries to the front lines. There's a recent UN report out about Sudanese and Chadian mercenaries being brought in by Haftar. And in the past, the Sudanese, for example, were deployed in the back lines. Now they're being pushed to the front lines. The Russians are on the front lines. And so we're starting to get very worried about a much more forceful assault on Tripoli affecting civilians. And for that reason, the Turks have said, look, if you need our military assistance, we're ready to step in.
What would Turkey's military support do for the internationally recognized government there? And, you know, as you mentioned, what are the potential challenges with Russia being involved?
Well, defend the capital. Right now, Turkey's involved in a very interesting relationship with Russia in Syria and in several other areas. And they've sort of worked out a modus operandi where one country can sort of operate as it wants to in one area, and in exchange the other one can operate sort of as it wants in another area. And they've worked out this dance in other theaters. We have not seen them both operating in the Libyan theater yet. The UAE is piloting Chinese drones to attack the Western positions. Russians are handling the strategy, and then again they're deploying these mercenaries on the front lines. But the defense of Tripoli is mostly being done by a group of militias. There are some mercenaries they've hired, but not that many. But they're defending themselves, and they see themselves defending the Arab Spring Revolution. And so it's very problematic to think that we could have Turkish troops deployed and then up against Russian troops. We had a moment 2 years ago where we wondered whether British special forces would be fighting French special forces on both sides of this conflict, and that was averted during the fight against ISIS. But now we're in another situation where international forces could end up fighting against each other in the Libyan conflict.
How is all of this playing out in the wake of that UN report on the recent arms embargo?
Well,
Violations.
I've been looking into this quite a bit, because how can you tell a sovereign state not to defend itself under attack in the context of an arms embargo? And the answer is there are all kinds of legal exceptions and then, let's say, extra legal exceptions. And the UN granted all kinds of exceptions, for example, in the fight against ISIS to both sides, and hasn't granted such exceptions as these two sides have been fighting each other. But Tripoli, as a sovereign state, has every right to defend itself, and it's very clear in the UN documents. So right now we have the sort of the spirit of the UN arms embargo up against the de facto sovereign rights of a country to defend itself, and no one has really sorted it out. The way the arms embargo has been operating has mostly been convincing governments to push back on the highest technology things they could bring in, and certainly the Egyptians and the Russians in particular haven't deployed everything they could deploy, and hopefully they won't.
All right. Well, this is certainly something that would have a very wide regional impact. William Lawrence, really appreciate you being with us. Thanks for that.
My pleasure.